they check the computer again, and the computer says, state of Texas sets you free. We have to get you out of here. We have to release you. So I started the journey. I walked 300 miles back to Dallas. God told me, he says, now walk. Don't put my name in your mouth. Just go show the world who I am.
Hello and welcome back to The Uncomfortable Truth. We're glad to have you today. We've got a special guest. We're super excited about this guy, Michael Molthan, motivational speaker, author, show host of M to the Rock. But when you just boil it down, it's a dude that loves Jesus and wants to show Christ's love to everybody. Michael, welcome to the show, brother.
Man, I'm so excited to be here. What a setup y'all got here.
Well, this is we always just credit Rich. Rich is the guy behind the camera who just makes everybody look good.
I mean, we're out here in East Texas, a population of 8.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this studio is worth more than the town.
People have made comments of how we look on the show, right? And I would consider myself maybe a solid 6, on the show. But if you see me in person, you'll be like, man, that dude's a 2.
No, that's not true. That's not true. In fact, when I met you outside the studio, I was like going, man, it's good. I thought you were going to be like a midget.
Well, I'm 56 years old, just turned 56. I'm kidding. He believed me.
Well, I'm 56.
Okay, you are?
Yeah, I just turned 56.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well,
You look great for a 56.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I should have went higher. So he was like, no way you're 72.
How old are you?
42.
My man.
Okay. Man, let's get into your story because you've had a crazy life. And I've been researching you. Obi's been researching you.
Oh, yeah.
Let's start at the beginning because that's normally where our stories start, right? And where the beginning of our testimonies and where we start experiencing life. What's the first thing that you remember as a child?
Wow, it's I can't wait to hear what I'm about to say. Right? Excuse me, and I'm glad that this is going to be a 19-hour show.
Yeah, we're gonna go. We're going way back.
I mean, I was clean shaved when I got here, right?
Yeah.
It's I was born in New Braunfels, Texas, down in South Texas Hill Country area, and in 1969, and we immediately moved to Plano, Texas, in early 1970, and that's where we landed. And I've been in, was in Plano kindergarten through 12th grade, and and I had a good, a normal. Let me rephrase this. Mom and Dad were married. Have a little brother. Very structured routine. And my dad became very, very successful businessman in the furniture industry. And, he's a workaholic. He was always gone. And my mom was, a stay-at-home mom. And I was a very, very creative, high energetic kid. And my brother, I say he was an L7, which is a square, but he just kind of stayed in his lane. It was very easy.
That's how a creative person views an L7, right?
Yeah, L7.
It's like you got no personality.
Yeah, no. And so I was high maintenance, back then. So they didn't have ADD and all that stuff. It was high maintenance, and so to calm the kid down led to spankings, and the spankings got worse. And I grew up with a mom who I believe struggles with addiction and alcoholism. The frustrating thing about alcoholism and addiction is it's the only disease on the planet that unfortunately has to be self-diagnosed. So I don't have the power to say that anybody's an alcoholic or a drug addict, but their behaviors, if they bother me or concern me, and the reason why it does is because I do it or I did it. So, growing up, it was very confusing because behind closed doors, it was crazy. But outside and going to the country clubs and growing up playing golf and being provided everything that I needed and want, nice stuff and big house. And, I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. I grew up in a very wealthy family.
Right.
And
It's an interesting way to put that.
yeah. And so behind closed doors, it was very confusing. from the day I was born that I could start remembering things. My grandfather on my mom's side was sexually abusing me, behind closed doors.
That's as far back as you can remember.
Yeah, I mean, it's ingrained in my head. This is what he was, doing to me, and so this trauma that was happening, and then the physical abuse from my mom and dad, and the verbal abuse. I was a very confused child. So outside, I would hide it, and I was very active and, fun and all this stuff, and became a very good golfer and growing up in the country clubs. And the men in the locker rooms actually became the men who raised me. They taught me how to drink, they taught me how to gamble, they taught me how to play golf, and they were teaching me how to die, at the end of the day. And my parents would always say, they always talked so bad about my grandfather, but yet he would come over, he would babysit, he was always around us, but we'd leave. He was a raging alcoholic, and he was a border patrol officer. My parents are from the valley, McAllen, down in the border, and so he was a border patrol officer, and they always said that, and just talk bad about him. Little did they know what he was doing to me. That only was between him and I. And I mean, he would take me fishing without a fishing pole. There were no fishing poles in the car. So without all the details, it was criminal, it was wrong, and it was horrible.
How much of your childhood did that span?
It was kindergarten through fifth grade, and then he died of throat cancer from alcoholism. I used to watch him, beat my grandmother like a man. Beat her up and down to the ground. And
when he died, what emotions do you remember feeling?
That's a good question. It was, I'll never forget when he was laying there in the bed and half his head was off from the surgery. They were transporting stuff to throat. I was forced to go in there because my mom and dad, they didn't know. They said, you come in here and see your grandfather. He wants to see you. Because he was always prowling and following me. And I mean, without getting into details, it was just eerie, And before I answer that question, my parents would always say, "You're just like your grandfather."
So they talked bad about him.
Yeah.
That he did terrible things to you, and they said, "You're just like him."
You're just like him. And they said your mannerisms, your hands, your fingers, and they were right. I mean, I look at and I have really unique penmanship. He had beautiful handwriting, and growing up in school, I always won the handwriting awards. I had perfect penmanship.
Man, that must be nice.
And
I'm looking down. I can't even read my own writing.
But it's so they were saying all this stuff, and I'm like, I don't want to grow up to be like him. You don't have a clue. And my mom battled with serious depression all the time, and so I was always being funny around the house and cracking jokes, and I was trying to make everybody else feel good because I was so focused on removing everybody else's pain and suffering. And that, looking through a different perspective today is now my gift. But I was trying to help others already because I was trying to do anything I could to change the way I felt. Right. Until I had my first sip of alcohol when I was 10 years old. But to answer your question, so how I felt is at that time, I did not want to go in there. And no one, why? Get in there. You're being selfish. And so I went in there. I'll never forget this. I couldn't feel my legs. And his hand was here. And she says, my mom's like, hold his hand, I mean, and so I grabbed his hand and he turned over and just looked at me. His eyes were black, literally black. And I fainted. I literally physically fainted.
Your body could not handle the emotions that you were
because
feeling.
he really looked like a monster.
And that was 10 years old. You were 10 years old.
Something like that.
11 maybe.
Yeah, fifth grade, whatever age that is.
I can't imagine going through that as a fifth grader and all the emotions. Yesterday, I was at my grandma's house. She's in her last days. And having that moment with her, of like holding her hand, she can't say a whole lot. The amount of love that's transferred back as a 42-year-old, realizing the life that she's had and processing that in a good way.
Right.
Is still not easy.
Yeah.
And then as a young kid, not even knowing really how to explain what's going on, what you're feeling. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and so my whole life, I mean, I never did slumber parties. Even to this day, um, it's not a battle. I recognize it's just so ingrained as a habit. I mean, even in my own house, and there's no one there, I still lock the bathroom door. Because he would come in while I was taking a shower and go in the bathroom, and it's all these boundaries that were crossed that didn't feel right, and they weren't right, and so it's it's a trauma it's real trauma. So I was always confused and trying to ease the pain and suffering from trauma. And I was my whole life, I was seeking visible things to fix my invisible problems. And, it gets better as we talk about it more, because when I share my story, it was what it was like. Then what happened? All right. And what's my life like today? And I very rarely share my story today on podcasts because it's out there so much. But I want to do that for y'all here because, we've got the time to do it, and I want your audience to hear it. Because right now, as we're starting and we're talking, like, oh, God, that poor guy.
Yeah.
And, let's take cardboard boxes and put them on sticks and let's go campaign, kill all child molesters. That's not that's not my mission. My mission is to share my story today as a result of forgiveness, true forgiveness of the amazing things that God is using that same grandfather to this day to save lives.
That's super super interesting and awesome that you have eventually got to that point of where your trauma turned into this testimony, but your story didn't stop there.
No, yeah.
It continued, not necessarily down the best path. It began, those emotions and all of that trauma led to more tests before the testimony came out. Can you kind of tell us the next steps in your life?
So, I started drinking, at 10 years old, and I had my first drink, and I mean, I wasn't drinking a 6-pack the next day. I loved the taste of it. And then I felt something happened. I just felt something was happening. And then I realized as I was drinking alcohol, I started feeling like everybody around me looked. Okay. My insides were matching their outsides. And I'm like, okay, this is the missing piece. And
because it slowed you down?
It gave me a sense of ease and comfort.
Yeah.
And yes, slowed me down. I have I speak on doctor trauma, on kids that, their parents send them to doctors to fix them, give them meds, give them ADHD meds and all this stuff. And, that's what my mom did, fix them, fix them, fix them. And so I started getting stuff in me that, all these chemicals. So I was always self-medicating. And I was self-medicating on everything. So when I speak, it's like we hear the word addiction, right? What is it? I love word studies. Like, what is addiction? What does it mean? And so when we think of addiction, we automatically think of drug addicts and alcoholics, right? You think of the $2 needle junkie under the bridge or the alcoholic under the bridge, right? Well, today I realized the only difference between me and the man underneath the bridge is one thing: that's the bridge, right? And I was both sides. I had a company. I started working very early. My dad, at the age of 9, said, "Go start a company," but I wanted to go work. I loved working and making money, and became very successful in the business world as a home builder. I went from high school to the pro golf tour. I caddied on the pro golf tour for the best golfer in the world. Perfect for an alcoholic and drug addict.
Yeah.
I was the popular guy in the men's locker room. I was young, but I was hanging out with very successful businessmen and their lifestyles, and I played golf with those guys because I could play, with them, and took it to the tour and caddied for Lanny Watkins on the pro golf tour at his prime. And so it was incredible. I was a bookie on the tour, real quick. But at a young age, I was diagnosed as very smart. I mean, I don't know what genius means, but they said it's like this genius IQ, level. And I'm twin brain, so I got the business brain and I have very creative brain.
That's pretty rare.
Very
to
rare.
have like high levels of function on both sides.
Right. but it's a disability too.
Okay.
Because, for example, and I struggle with it in the M to the Rock platform, because being a new creature in Christ and serving others and being selfless, Satan will go to my left side of the brain, the business part of it, to make it work. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because the hustle's gone, right?
Oh, we could talk about that all day.
All day.
Yeah.
We could talk about that all day. It's like the service of like serving others, but how do I build that into a long-term business that makes money? Well, it's not about the money. It's about over here. It's about serving people. Well, how am I going to survive?
Yeah.
It's like back and forth, back and forth. It's like ping pong in your head.
It's called spiritual warfare.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so that's been a really learning experience for me over the last 8 years, because my business, is one of the most well-known high-end luxury home builders in the Dallas Fort Worth area and the Park Cities and down there, and for 20 years, we did complicated, huge projects and love it. I grew up and love real estate and love home building, and I love the creative part of it. So back to addiction. What is it? What is the definition of it? Here it is. Addiction is the street name for spiritual stronghold. That's what it is. It is the street name for spiritual stronghold. So let's just go a little deeper. Let's break that down. Addiction is a person, place, thing, and here's a scary one, or a thought that has become my source. So with that said, if you're breathing oxygen, everyone is an addict.
Right.
Okay. And so, I want to help remove the stigma from drug addicts and alcoholics and family members. Why do family members get so frustrated and say, oh my God, he's just a drug addict, alcoholic. We'll just put him over here. Okay. And they're frustrated with him. Well, the reason why they get frustrated is because they actually see their own character defects live on stage, and it scares them. They don't drink and do drugs, but their other visible addictions, is there. So it scares the parent. Mm-hmm. And the reason why that makes sense is that as a result of forgiveness, and today as I look at life through God's perspective, not mine, not the world or not the cultures, right? I look at it through God's perspective. I was able to forgive my mom because what she was really saying, she was scared because she was seeing herself in me. She didn't see it in my brother because we're different. I was her clone. She was seeing herself in me, and on top of that, she was seeing her father in me.
Right.
So out of fear and lack of faith and no spirituality, she's left to her own devices. So hitting and the beating and the screaming and throwing things at me and all this stuff, it was all fear-based. Is it okay? No, but it gave me a better understanding of forgiving. So now I get to use that today to share on platforms like this to help other moms and stuff like that, going, okay, I see that. Mm-hmm. And so as we break it down that deep, that's seeing it from the spiritual realm. See, my whole life I wanted to be smart, successful. That was my source. And knew nothing about spirituality because I try to outsmart it. I try, that's our world today is trying to get more educated, and they're less spiritual.
For sure.
And so that's kind of working up to that, and then I married my childhood best friend since kindergarten. We were best friends.
Oh wow!
And she was our CFO, ran the business. Her dad is architectural engineer, civil engineer. He owned a huge commercial construction company. He retired very early, sold it for a lot of money, and so he really groomed me from the business side of it. And in 2000, I had two boys that, I made the decision that it was my responsibility to change the cycle. And I wanted to be a really good dad. Now, I'm not a believer. Okay. I'm not a believer. I'm agnostic, but Casper the Friendly Ghost. I mean, come on, guys. I mean, it's witchcraft, what y'all are talking
Santa
about.
Claus in the sky.
Yeah, God spoke to me. You're tripping on acid.
Mm-hmm.
You need to go see a therapist. You know what I mean? Right. And stuff like that. So, but I ran an honest business. I wasn't, I had my own problems. And every visible thing was my source. So in 2009, my wife collapsed with a massive brain hemorrhage out the clear blue. And that's where my life really took a change because prior to that, in 2002, I started, seeking help, trying to get help, different treatment centers. I always check it out to make sure it was nice and polished because I didn't want to be like the man underneath the bridge, right? You remember the story? And so I went to Betty Ford in 2002. And the reason why I say Betty Ford and not treatment, I want everybody to know I went to Betty Ford because that's where important people like me go.
Right.
That's
Right.
what I thought of myself, that ego and pride.
What was your basis of building your? You said you weren't a Christian. You thought it was all hoopla. What was your basis of building principles up until that point?
Well, my dad, I learned a lot from my dad, watching him, and he was good to people. He ran a good business. I was one of those guys. There's right and wrong, and I was practicing one of the 10 Commandments and didn't even know it. Treat people like you want to be treated. That just felt right. But giving my life to Christ, as smart as I am, and when I would hear that, I couldn't process it. I mean, it lasted in my brain for a half a second.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I just couldn't process it.
You're open to the thought, but then that isn't makes zero sense to you at the time.
Makes zero sense. I didn't even think about it enough to make the conclusion that it made zero sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, let's talk about the cost of eggs in Africa.
Right.
No, I got to go.
Yeah.
It's so, but it's amazing that you got me thinking. It's amazing the way that I used to think, and the way my best thinking got me right here on this podcast. Where my life is today, it's not even close to my game plan. Even today, I mean, 8 years later, I'm like going,
What are we doing, Lord?
What am I doing?
It's day by day, right?
Yeah, I'm talking to Luke Hokenjos, lives in the sticks in Louisiana. He's become a very close friend of mine. I know he's on your show. I love that man. And, driving out here to, hang out with y'all to talk. And,
Isn't that most of businessmen struggle? I feel like that we get inundated. We're one track. We're focused on growing, making more money, glorifying ourselves. How can we accomplish more so that we're seen more, we're recognized, we're affirmed? And there's a point when you're in the climax of that, the thought of surrendering that to the Lord is just nowhere to be found.
It is. I just remember this when you asked me this. I remember I was at a luncheon one time, in the business world, and they had a speaker up there, and he was talking about, and he tells this story how he literally gives 100% of his income every year to the Lord, and I'm like, and where are you going with this? And then he says, and the next year, my income doubled. And I'm like, you're going to sit there and lie to me? You know what I mean? And it just, that right there. And he was passionate about it. And I'm like, I'm like, it made no sense to me. And it wasn't a prosperity gospel speech. I mean, this guy was solid.
Business. Yeah.
He was solid. I mean,
Were you thinking like, who hired this guy to come speak to us?
This makes absolutely no sense to me.
Right.
You know what I mean? I just invested $15 million in a piece of land, and I want my EBITDA to be 14% return. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like he's sitting there going, I just gave it all to the Lord, and he gave me back half of it. Luke's got those stories.
Yes, he does.
And
his last podcast that was released was specifically talking about this.
I watched that, and I mean, he hasn't even told you. He tells me, I mean, literally when this stuff happens, Luke will call me and go, "Man, you're not going to believe this."
Yeah.
I was cutting firewood, and the Lord spoke to me, and He said, "There's a lady that's 3 miles away that lives on the corner of in that white house, the blue front door, and she needs a truck, and you need to go to the other house and go pick up that truck because they're going to have the title in it signed already." And I mean,
it's that detailed.
He tells me the story, and I'm like, "What?"
And then it happens.
And the cool thing is, I call him with my stories too.
Yeah.
Because it's cool because how real God works. So now I'm that guy that am I giving 100% of my income to the Lord? Nope, I'm not. But I remember that. I remember that speech. I can tell you this: I'm giving 100% of my time to the Lord,
Yeah.
Right.
and it's
Right.
painful, and it's painful. So, anyways, the disease gets, worse and worse. I'll never forget it, Betty Ford. When I was there, one really cool thing about it is I'm walking down the hallway, and this my counselor walks by, and he's this real skinny African American guy. And remember, the reason why I'm saying these African Americans, a big part of my story, because I grew up in a culture that was all white, um, and so, and I had nothing against it. You know what I mean? It was, and he said to me, he goes, um, can I talk to you for a second? And I said, yeah. And he goes, you got a really good spirit and personality about you. I said, well, I said, thanks, man. He says, if you really want to get sober, all right, step 3, the sooner you do step 3, you will have a life like no other. And as he's saying this, I'm looking over his shoulder and I can see the 12 steps. And in step 3, it says, made a decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God as I understand them. And right when I saw God, I'm like, I check out. All right. And I go, hey, I'm the client, you're the counselor. I appreciate that. I appreciate that ain't happening. Okay. And he says, it's going to be very painful. This is in 2002. All right. And he says, let me ask you something. Okay. I said, okay. He says, you talk about your boys in group all the time. That's all you talk about. And it's real. Everybody's engaged. I mean, you love these boys. It is a parent. You have made a decision that you want to be a great father for these boys. And he says, you said something that was so powerful in group. It's not about money. He says, the greatest gift you can give your boys is time. Right. And I said that at that time, and that caught him. And he says, let me ask you a question about God. You get to create your God. It just can't be you. It couldn't be me.
That was step 3 is
It's made a decision to turn our will and life over to the care of God as
to your understanding.
All right, to my understanding. He says, do you believe in God? And I said, no, I don't. I have nothing against anybody that believes in God. I just don't. And he says, let me ask you something. If your 2 boys, and they were 9 and 10 at the time, he says, if your 2 boys come up to you and they spit in your face, cuss you out, flip you off, and do all this stuff, and walk out the door right now at their age, how would you feel? I said, I'd be really devastated. He says, and they never come back. They don't call. They don't text. I think we had texting in 2002. Yeah.
Yeah, it just started.
Yeah. So they don't, no communication. How would you feel with not speaking to them or here? I said, my heart would be broken. I'd really be upset. And he says, 40 years later, there's a knock on the front door. This is the hallway at Betty Ford. We're having this. 40 years later, there's a knock on the front door, and you open that door, and there's 2 grown men standing there, and you recognize them. Do you let them in your house? I said, absolutely. No questions asked. He says, you just described your God. And he walked off, and I'm like, nice try. But inside, that seed was planted. All right. So in 2002, I'm at Betty Ford. All right. After 2002, in 2009, when my wife went down, all right, with the massive brain hemorrhage, was in a coma for 2 or 3 years. We were planning a funeral. My in-laws, the families are fighting over money. It is a disaster. I mean, it is a mess. And I have my boys, I'm taking care of them. And, they go over to my in-laws' house that I didn't get along with at the time. And, of course, I have major abandonment issues, obviously, from growing up. And in 2009, my life changed forever. And I hadn't drank in like 7 years. I was just dry, just working. Other visible things were my source.
So you figured out how to clean it up from 2002 to 2009.
I was a dry drunk.
Okay.
I mean, a dry drunk is when people will go drink. You know what I
Okay.
mean? But I really wasn't, because my children, my boys were my drug of choice. My job was my drug of choice. Money was my drug of choice. These were the visible things to try to fix my invisible problems.
Which the world says is okay.
Which the world and the culture says it's okay, right?
You don't-
Promotes.
At the time, you don't feel like there's an issue.
No,
You feel like I'm on track.
I'm on track.
Yeah.
And so when Stacy went down with this, it's called an AVM. You know, you're born with it, and if you have an AVM at over the age of, I think 40 or something like that, that's right. Yeah, over the age of 40, the survival rate is nothing. I mean, so we're literally planning a funeral and 17-hour surgery, and this is like overnight.
Mm.
Um, and after all the family fighting and all this stuff, and my biggest my biggest thing that I'm working on still today is that if I let someone close to me, which I have, my circle is very tight. It's just, and that's from past trauma, letting people get close. Today, it's an asset. I mean, it's really cool because I don't feel like I have to save the world, you know. But if I let someone close to me and they betray me and accuse me of doing something that I didn't do, it paralyzes me.
Question your character, basically.
Paralyzes me. And, you know, that's what the family members were doing. And I had no tools on how to handle that. So I literally went to the gas station to get diesel. I had a big truck that were pulling motocross trailers and stuff like that, and being a builder, and had no intention. And I walked in to pay, you know, for my gas, diesel, and I walked out with an 18 pack of Coors Light and a pack of cigarettes, you know, and I was a social drinker for about 8 minutes.
Okay.
And I went off on the races. And in 2011, I got pulled over by the Dallas Police Department. I was intoxicated and had a lot of cocaine in my truck. I got arrested.
Can we pause
Yeah.
for a second and go back to this time where your wife's in a coma? I think there's two things that really resonate with me. Is that you said years, right? She was in a coma for years. That's tough. And then also, I want to hit on your experiences of that, and then also how money can destroy families. That's terrifying to a lot of people. And if we're not thinking about it as if your parents have any money or if your spouse has any money and something happens, if we're not prepared for that prior to, it can literally tear your family apart. Can you talk about your experience through that?
Yeah, it was very scary because my wife, who majored in business accounting, perfect business. You know, she was our CFO. I could do accounting and numbers and all that stuff, but I was better set over here, so she handled that department all the way down to the home. So we would do financial reviews, you know, once a week. And I'm a one-sheeter guy. If I want data, I want to see it. But a one-sheeter guy, here we are. All right. I always tell everybody that they're married, make sure that they have a master shared password list.
Mm-hmm.
Because when she was in the coma, I I couldn't pay bills, and you know, and there
You
was
just
some.
didn't know how because you couldn't
Well, I
log
knew
in.
how, but like for example, like Nordstrom.
Yeah.
Okay, they called and they said, you know, it's like 3 days past due, and we need to pay it. And I said, okay, well, I'll pay it. And they said, well, we need to talk to, you know, your wife. And I said, well, I'm her husband. You know, I can pay it. And they go, well, you know the password. And I go, no, I don't. And so little stuff like that crept up where, you know,
Eat you alive, huh?
each alive, and then, you know, being in a coma, and then like I signed her name on something like that, you know, to get the password, and I pay something off, but then the in-laws would use that in court against me, saying that I forged her signature, you know. So it was this. I was like, come on, man, and so it was crazy stuff like that, you know, where I got very resentful and very angry, and I was being triggered from past childhood trauma of being abandoned, betrayed, and all this stuff, and I lost my mind, you know, because they were telling my boys stuff because they wanted the boys and their daughter, and they were in fear because their daughter, and they were telling my boys stuff that wasn't true, and so that story of in Betty Ford in the hallway literally happened, where to this day I haven't talked to my boys, you know, and so I when I got that beer, then my behaviors, because of anger and resentment, then the things that they were saying about me that weren't true, because of my behaviors, the role I played, it's like, well, maybe they are right. You know what
Do
I
you
mean?
feel like there was also a level of justification there?
I believe in justifiable resentment.
Okay.
Okay, but the solution is still the same. It's what role do I play in it, and forgiveness and
Right.
acceptance. Um, so so my behaviors, I twisted off, and I literally went on a run where I gave all my money to them. So if y'all want the control, I'll give you all the control, and it worked. But like a week later, it's like going, uh oh,
What do I do?
what do I do?
Hmm.
And so I was always trying to make the comeback and all this stuff, and it just kept crashing, and the drug use and alcoholism got worse and worse, and to the point where I couldn't pay my electric bill, and here I am, a high seven-figure net worth, killing the game. And in 2010, I got arrested. My first arrest, and I got a mugshot. And I'm like, holy cow! And I went down, and they took me in. And I'm in this culture, in this world that is crazy. And here's what's interesting is I literally said on that first arrest, I said, I'm done. I'm never ever doing this again. And guys, I meant it with every ounce of blood in my body.
Hmm.
I meant it. And heck, I didn't know how to bond out. I didn't know how to do this stuff. And I had a felony. My first charge was a felony. And so I heard the felony word. I'm like, I'm going to prison. So I got bonded out the next day. And remember what I said. And I've heard people say, after big overdoses, and they tell their story like going, I got high again that night. You know what I mean? I was that guy. When I got to back to my apartment, I was anxious, and I'm going, I'm just going to drink a beer just to calm down. And I was drunk and high again that night. 26 mug shots later is when a total of 27 mug shots. I had this spiritual awakening where Christ came into my life. Okay, and it had to be. There were times where I had foxhole prayers, looking at the mirror, going, "If you're out there, the pain's bad enough." But I didn't. He came into my life, and I had this bright light, burning bush moment. I didn't light the bush on fire this time, but you know what I mean.
Right.
This moment that changed my life forever, and how it was done is unbelievable.
Well, let's get to it. Before we get, you said you went from 2010 to 26 mug shots later. That's a lot. What was your life like in during those 26 mugshot years?
It was self-will run riot. It was anger, resentment. The anger and resentment towards what people had done. I was full-blown victim. I was playing this victim role. Some of it valid, but I couldn't get rid of the pain and suffering, you know? And I had that question like everybody, why would a God allow all this pain and suffering? Why would God allow this to happen? Why would he allow this? And so to quiet the noise, remember what I said? I said, I drank at the beginning because I wanted to feel like everybody around me looked, right? So in order to keep that feeling, I would have to do more and more and more. Then I continued to drink and do drugs because I wanted to feel good about the bad decisions I was making. So here I am, I got real trauma, all right? And now I've got self-inflicted trauma that I'm creating, which is a disaster. That's suicide. And I've tried to commit suicide numerous times. I mean, literally tried and failed at it. My first attempt was in the sixth grade. Swallowed a whole bottle of pills, and so my brother, pulled a gun out of my mouth twice, and so all these things I was trying to do it, but that answers your question, I think.
Yeah. So after 26, you said you had an awakening, you had a moment, and I believe, and I know there's a story behind this.
Yeah,
it's
so
pretty fascinating.
This is where I really like to start all that.
This is where we wanted to start, right?
Yeah, all the other stuff, what it was like. It was, a lot of times, like, okay, what it was like. Drank alcohol. I did drugs. I fell down. I woke up. I said I was never going to do it again, and I did it again that afternoon. That's what it was like. So when people
Then
reach
you
out,
get frustrated that you did it again, then the cycle continues.
it's every alcoholic drug addict story.
Mhm.
Okay, when people reach out to
It's like you were saying earlier, we're all addicts. We're
hmm
addicted to sin to some level, and
hmm
when one changes, then maybe something
hmm
else creeps in, and God says like sanctification, like
hmm
I'm trying to pull that away from you.
What I
Let
heard
go.
from Michael's story though is like from the beginning, it's you love really deeply. You know,
hmm
you love like all you wanted to talk about at rehab was your kids. I
hmm
mean, like that's it. Like I want to talk about and tell you guys how much I love my kids because it filled you with joy and they filled you with joy. And it's like that betrayal for someone that loves that deeply is so much deeper. It cuts so much deeper. And I mean, I don't know anybody that would really, in that moment of life, know how to deal with that.
hmm
I feel like that most people are going to turn to a life of making a lot of wrong choices in a situation. My wife is, you know, potentially passing away. My kids are going away. Everything that I love deeply is gone,
hmm
and it's like, what's the point?
Right.
What's the point? Why even try? Let me mask all of this pain. And that's what you did,
hmm
but you did it like you loved really deeply,
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Yeah.
and it makes sense to see how you could have gone deeper than most because you love deeper than most.
Yeah. And I've noticed this that most people, if we put labels on it, I'm seeing, watching. The most I talk is like right here with y'all. I'm a very, very quiet, private person. It blows people away. I went to an event last Monday with big. I was in the audience, and so like this guy was like going, "Go do your deal, go work the room," and I'm like,
I don't do that.
I don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't do that. I mean, I'm like, I gotta get out of here. So, yeah, I mean, most alcoholics and drug addicts with the label deal. If we talk about the label, I've noticed a consistency that are extremely empathetic people.
Hmm.
That's interesting.
I'll buy anybody's drink. I'll pick up your tab because the reason is, and remember when I was a kid, I was always being funny around my parents. Even with the beatings, I was being funny because when they laughed, it changed the way I felt.
Hmm.
Okay. So I felt like I was removing their pain and suffering.
Mm.
So I was serving them because it was making me feel good.
Isn't that how God designed it though?
That's the way we're engineered. We don't realize it.
Yeah.
Okay. So in summary, my character defects are my assets today.
hmm
Right.
When you make people laugh today, how does it make you feel?
Great. Great. But if they don't laugh, I'm okay.
You're still great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, wait a minute, you didn't laugh at me?
Wait.
Well, I'm gonna go steal your truck.
When I was messing with my kids, like they don't think my jokes are funny, and then when I make a stupid dad joke and they don't laugh, I make fun of myself that was a stupid joke, and they'll laugh, and then I'm like, now I really I feel better. Like,
That's awesome.
So after the 26,
27th.
20 on the
The
27th.
27th mugshot. So May 29th, 2017, I was staying at a female's place, and I came into the house, and the alarm went off, and I went to change the code. I mean, to enter the code in, and she had changed it. And so I went upstairs, and she was a very, very sick alcoholic drug addict. And I went upstairs to say, "Hey, the phone's ringing. That's the alarm company. The alarm got changed." She woke up, and she was, in a blackout, and she got on the phone, and, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Just tell them your new code so they'll turn the alarm off." And she started screaming. She screamed like, "I'm not gonna. What are you talking about?" She just knew what she was doing, right?
Mhm.
And so they called the police to come out, and they came out, and it was like deep. I mean, I was like, "What is going on here?" Now I'm on probation. All right, I'm on probation. I'm dirty. I'm using. I'm drinking, and it was interesting because they went up to talk to her, and I was actually sleeping, downstairs, and they went up to talk to her, and they came back down, and they said, "Hey, put your jeans on, your t-shirt, and come out front. So I went out front, and and I was scared because I was on probation. Like, I'm not clean. I'm gonna pee dirty.
Mm-hmm.
And they were putting you under arrest for domestic violence. I said, what? What are you talking about? He says, yeah. He says, she's saying that you try to choke her and kill her. And I go, I've never put hands on anybody.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so, and there we go. I was being accused of something I didn't do. And I'll never forget that feeling. I'm like going, I'm out of there. Because Judge Bennett, who I said, somebody today, she's a very close friend of mine today by default. And so
been around her a lot. Huh?
Yeah, and I always tell everybody she's my professional photographer. She takes all my mugshot pictures, and so we got a little dog and pony show where we go around and speak. And,
I love it.
But she wasn't having it when she was hard on me, and so I knew when they took me down, it was game over. I mean, because I just disrespected her and everything that she tried to do to help, and I wasn't her favorite. I mean, she was hard on everybody. She saw me as this, prima donna, egomaniac and all this stuff, but she was also very, very confused because I didn't fit that scene. She knew what I did and all this stuff, and
the charges didn't add up to what she knew about you.
Yeah,
her baseline.
And then while I was incarcerated, the ex-in-laws would file charges on me of, I can't remember what the charge was, stupid criminal mischief and all that stuff. And she's like, okay, wait a minute, there's something up here. This guy's being kicked while he's down. He couldn't have done this. He's in jail.
Mm-hmm.
So it started exposing itself where it was like, and I was pleading guilty. I just would sign it. And the reason why I do that is because I didn't want any drama with the boys and their mom who was in bed. I was protecting them.
Mm-hmm.
So I go down there and I get locked up in the North Tower. They always put me in the North Tower in Dallas County, which is one of the North Tower second floor is the most dangerous floor in the country. One of them. I mean, it's where all your aggravated assault charges, your murderers, that's where they put them all. And that's where they put me because of this, I guess because of this charge. And I didn't do this, and 2-man cell, it's rock and roll. I mean, they're fighting. I saw a guy get stabbed. I saw a guy jump off the second row and get killed. Now, this is my 27th arrest. So I've been all over the state of Texas. So out of 6 years, I was incarcerated 4 years.
Okay.
So I'm in there and detoxing, and I'm like, it was a different feeling. And I was like, it's over.
How was the detox? I'm sorry to interrupt you. How was the detox process when you went to jail? You're addicted to drugs or on drugs before. You can't get them in prison. Mm-mm. What's it like going through that?
It's called shake and bake.
Okay.
You're kicking. It is hell. Absolute hell. There's no soft landing. There's no, hey, guard, I'm coming off heroin, opiates. I mean, I was on it all. I mean, all this stuff. And I had become that $2 needle junkie, this label, And so when I talk to people, they go, man, my story's not as bad as yours. I say, yet. You're eligible too. I used to do that. I was at Betty Ford. Now I'm here in my 27th mugshot. And it's starting to come together what that guy said was right, And so, and I always heard him.
That's so cool.
I never forgot that meeting in the hallway, And so, and it scared me because I didn't want it to happen. So when I got that 27th mugshot, I'm in there and I'm just detox. I want to die, And I'll never forget, I was on the top bunk, and now the culture is different. I'm the minority, and I'm surrounded by, African American and Mexican, and I'm not scared, but I just stayed to myself, real quiet, and the thing is they would look at me because I'm so proper. I didn't have any tats, at the time,
Okay.
and so I'm so proper. They thought I was either gay or a cop. And so I just, stayed to myself. And so I was on this top bunk, and the bottom bunk is kind of a luxury. When you get to the bottom bunk, it blocks the light, and you got a little bigger, bed, and a little more privacy. And the guy below me, because I'm waiting to go to court. I've been indicted, but I'm waiting to go to court. It's taking forever, and there's a reason why. And I'm like, man, I want to get this going. And it's so funny how God works. I mean, I'm talking forever to go to court. It took like, so May 29th is when I went to court. I didn't see the judge for like 60, wait, May, June, July 7th. So May, June, July. So 2 months. All right.
Almost 2.5.
Yeah, 2.5. Before I even went to the judge, for my charge, which is really long. And so as I'm detoxing, my cellie who's sleeping below me catches chain. I know all the language now, right? He catches chain to go to prison. And so I'm like, awesome.
What does that mean?
So catching chain is when you go from county jail to prison.
Okay, gotcha.
And you get on the Bluebird, which
Okay.
is the Greyhound.
Okay.
You're cuffed together with another guy, and you don't want to go to the bathroom because you're all going together.
Shaking the bush, boss.
Right. But my trauma, sexual abuse trauma, I was terrified of that. The strip search, I almost passed out. Every time I almost passed out. So the bottom bunk opens up, and I'm just about to get down on the bottom bunk, and a new inmate comes in. Now he's this old school guy from Oak Cliff, African American, 75 years old. He's back on a bench warrant. He committed murder, never getting out. Right? He's got polio, and he's dragging his right leg. He's got big old glasses on. And he comes in, and you call him School. Older guys, hey, what's up, School? And so he comes in. Now, I have to get him a bottom bunk. Okay, if I don't, I'm going to get stepped on. I'm like, so he comes in, and he said, what's your name? And I said, Rabbit. They call me Rabbit. That was my prison name. Ironically, my son's nickname, because he was so fast, was Rabbit.
Oh, wow.
So I coached all their football and soccer, and everybody called him Rabbit. So they called me Rabbit, incarcerated, because I couldn't sit still. I would pace we'd be locked up in a 4x9 cell 20 hours a day. When they let us out, I was pacing, making laps. So this old school comes in, and he says, what's your name? And I said, I'm Rabbit. And he says, I'm Ooh-wee. I said, excuse me? He says, I'm Ooh-wee. I go, okay, hey, Ooh-wee. I said, man, you can have the bottom bunk. Grab the bottom bunk. And so the door's open, and I'm out there, and he's sitting at his little desk. I'm out there. I'm just pacing, just burning laps. I'm just trying to stay busy because my head is going nuts, because I'm trying to get out. How do I get out of here? I'll never do this again, right? One of those deals. I'm scared to death. I'm scared to death of this charge that's been charged against me that's not true. And I'm tripping. And so, when we get back in there and they shut the door, for lockup, he looks at me. He goes, say, look out, Rabbit. I said, what's going on? He says, man, you're doing hard time. I said, what are you talking about? He says, you're doing hard time. He says, you need to learn how to do time because you're making a lot of people nervous. And he says, and they're going to beat the brakes off you. He says, let me help you. I'm like, okay.
Wow.
I said, what is hard time? He says, man, you need to get out of that world. Because he saw me pacing. I'm just thinking. He says, you got to get out of that world. It was interesting because when you're incarcerated, here's a guy from my culture to this culture. And I'm learning. I'm like, what do you mean? And I would notice that if you see a guy sitting there, he's daydreaming, I'd say, hey, look out, Obi. Get out of that world. And it gets him back into the now, right? Because you can go nuts in there, all right? I was trying to understand all this because here I am, very educated, very smart, twin brain, right? Mm-hmm. But dumb, okay? And so I was thinking about that. And so I'm sitting there and I'm feeling better and all that stuff. So I get a visitor. My visitor is my public defender. And I go see him, all right? And I come back. As I'm walking in, a gentleman pushed the button because he didn't feel safe. You can push the button, but you don't feel safe, and they move you into another tank, right? And so as I'm walking in, he says, hey, look out, Rabbit, you can have this book. He just handed me a book. I'm like, okay, so I just carry it to my deal. You can look at it. And I threw it up on my bunk, and as they lock us down, Ooh-wee says, hey, what's that book up there? And I looked at it, and I said, you can have it. He goes, no, what's it say? I thought he was playing a joke on me. I thought he was like, being Mr. Miyagi or something like that.
Yeah. He was already working on you.
Yeah. I'm like, it's a boring cover. It's like white with an arrow, and I'm saying, it says Detours by Dr. Tony Evans. He goes, ooh, man, I love me some Dr. Tony Evans.
Okay.
And this is where it really gets good. He goes, I love me some Dr. Tony Evans. I said, who is he? He said, man, that's a diesel. I said, we talking about who is this guy? And he says, man, he's the pastor at Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship, off Camp Wisdom, down there. He says, as a matter of fact, when I was a youngster, he says, there'd be this Dr. Tony Evans drive around in his pickup truck and van when they just started the A-frame building. That's all they had, him and Miss Evans. The A-frame building, he'd literally drive around and pick people up and bring them to church. And he said he saw me scooting my leg. And I said, well, why they call you ooh-wee? He says, because every time I walk up and down the streets, those girls on the front porch, they see me and say, ooh-wee. So that was his name. I mean, and so I go, and so he goes, yeah, Dr. Tony Evans, I'd be coming off that heroin, and he'd pick me up and take me to church. And he says, I listened to a little bit what he said, and man, he is so good. But I'll be honest with you, I went to church because I wanted donuts and see the girls. All right. And so it's really cool how God works, because when I sit down with Pastor Evans and tell him the story, it's cool. And so he goes, that night is where, everybody's kind of calming down, whatever that looks like in there. It's always noise. I mean, it's loud. It's loud all the time.
Okay.
But he says, hey, man, pull that Dr. Evans book. I go, yeah. He says, I go, here you go. And he goes, will you read it to me? I go, what are you talking about? This is so foreign to me. I mean, it was like, what are you talking about? He goes, will you read it to me? I said, I don't understand. He goes, I can't read and write. I go, what? And I said, okay. So I open it up and just start reading this thing, and it's black words on white paper. And I was really uncomfortable. It's kind of like me learning how to pray with my fiance. That's just uncomfortable for me. I'm getting better at it. There is. And then like prayer requests. Anybody got any prayer requests? Yeah, pray for me. I've got to go to the dentist tomorrow. And and I did one prayer request and they're like praying for me. It just made me uncomfortable. I'm just getting better at it, but I'm just being honest. I mean, I'm just being out there. And so that's what it kind of felt like. So I'm reading it to them. And Dr. Evans breaks down the story of Joseph and, the betrayal and the abandonment. And it was just like, wow, this is my story. And, a lot of people come up to me and say, man, you got the story of Job and Joseph. And I said, you know what? There are a lot of similarities, but they had faith in God and I didn't. So, anyways, I haven't told this in a long time, obviously. So I kept reading the story, and cause I'm into weed. I really do. I don't know where he's at, because I don't know his free world name. So he would go, oh man, I love me some Paul. Talking about Paul. I love me some Paul. He goes, I go, who's Paul? I don't know who Paul is. And excuse me a second. I go, I don't know who Paul is. And he said, y'all don't have a very good show here. People aren't crying on it. Y'all don't have. Y'all ain't getting deep. Why am I getting interviewing myself?
Because we haven't had to say anything.
So did Luke cry?
Luke did not cry.
Oh,
But
man.
we've had it. Most do.
Yeah, but we're gonna just splash his face next time he comes on the show. And we're gonna cut back to him and be like, "Hey man, what's going on?"
So I got to keep going. This is
Just
the high point of the deal.
Yeah, I'm loving this. Is like how God can use a dude like Uwe, who we don't even know where he's at.
How he used Dr. Tony Evans
to
and
speak
through
a random book and a guy leaving the cell, and like these things are not coincidence.
Right. It gets better. It gets gooder.
I'm excited.
It gets gooder.
Let's go gooder.
So as I'm reading this, okay, to him, I mean, just read, and he would fall asleep, and he purred like a cat. It was cute. It was like, oh, you know what I mean? But I couldn't put it down. It just, these black words on white paper started speaking to me. Something was happening. So the next thing I know, guys, 4 days go by. 4 days go by. I'm not anxious. I'm not paranoid. I'm not pacing around. I'm in this book and I'm chopping it up with ooh-wee. And I start journaling, writing these things down that I'm seeing in it. And another inmate walks by and he goes, man, you got the coolest handwriting. And he says, what'd you write? And I go, I wrote a quote or something. I go, well, just read it. I wrote, he goes, I can't read. I can't write. Now, I've been in all these different tanks, being incarcerated all these times. But this tank, nobody could read and write.
You're kidding me.
Nobody. I had to write their kites for them.
What is a kite?
A kite is like a request, like,
We're green in here, baby.
okay, so it's a kite. It's a note. You fill a note out and you give it to the guards. You put it, during badge count. You put it in like, hey, I need I want to be transferred to a sober pod, or I would like to have a book. They would always request books. That's why I was confused. There's books all over this tank, and the reason why is you use the books for pillows.
Oh, okay.
Because you put the books underneath the 2-inch mat, it props your head up as a pillow. I did it too. And so I wanted more as I'm reading this, okay? And so there's this
You're getting hungry.
I'm getting hungry. Here I am. And so this gangbanger has this Living Recovery Bible, New Living Translation, and he's using it as a book. It's still wrapped in the plastic that's shipped in. And he saw my passion in what I was doing. Remember, I'm the only white guy in here. I'm by myself, and Uwe and I are just chopping it up, right? I'm reading to him, and he's making soap. He takes all the county soap, makes it to a big bar, and everybody's got their hustle, and money's nothing in prison. I could have $1,000 spread on the concrete floor. It's worth nothing. 5 honey buns, we getting down.
Okay.
Okay. So food is currency in prison. I'm learning all this stuff, the language, the code, and all this stuff. And so, it was so I'm starting to get engaged. Now, remember, I still haven't seen my judge yet. Usually, you see him quick and get on down the road. And so, I start reading this Living Recovery Bible, in it because he wanted to know who Paul is. He wanted to talk about Paul. He says, "Who's Paul?" I said, "I don't know who Paul is." So I'm trying to find Paul in the Bible. Who's Paul? Am I looking for the Book of Paul, or I don't know. I'm a clumsy Christian. I mean, no, I'm not even a believer yet.
Okay.
I'm not a believer yet, and so I'm looking at it and I'm like comparing it, and then I want to go. I want to read more about this Joseph cat. So I go to the back of the Bible, right, and I'm like going word search for Joseph. So I go to Genesis, in Genesis, and I'm reading about this, and I'm like. And so stuff, I mean, I can't get enough, and these days are flying by, and I'm like, I'm home. Here I am. I was in a 12,000 square foot home with Tempur-Pedic mattress, and now I'm here all built, I had no debt, and all this stuff. And now I'm locked up, never had a visitor. No one visited me, never got mail. I got mail one time. They called me out, FedEx, and I sold a $3.5 million home in prison.
Oh my goodness.
I had to sign the title on it. And and I'm like, doing all this stuff and really into it. And then I'm this book Detours, I'm reading it and how it's affecting me. And at dinner chow, the spirit I didn't know it was a spirit at the time, but when I was in home building, I used to speak to realtor communities in all of the country to educate them on social media. I was really involved in when social media very first started. I started understanding it. My oldest son is in social media. Today, he is now the owner of like AKA Collective, and he is the mastermind of Bryson DeChambeau.
Okay.
He lives with them. Both my boys do. And so everything I see on Bryson DeChambeau, he's the one that created that platform.
That's cool.
So I used to speak on that. So I get up, I say, look out, guys. I gotta look out, family. I just gotta share something with you that I want to share. It's something that Dr. Tony Evans wrote in there, and I would just say, I said, today I realize. That's what I would say. I said, and I didn't realize what I was doing, but today I realize, boo, 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 boo. And they say, they loved it. You know what I mean? And so every night at chow, I was reading this stuff. Now, remember when I came into this tank, it was rock and roll. It was Bad News Bears. I mean, I'm talking gangster. I mean, it was
tough,
scary.
Roughest of
everything
rough.
I've ever seen. Okay. And so now this tank is coming together.
It's transforming.
The guards are amazed at what's happening. And I'm the tank boss. Rabbit's the tank boss.
You're the pastor.
Well, not even that. I'm not a believer yet.
Right.
I'm still not a believer. And so this stuff has happened. We got to grow. And I'm not, it's not feeding me my dopamine of like, okay, I have to be, I've never been a controlling person. I was like, it wasn't that. It was just,
Do you feel like you're just speaking life into these people?
I do. It's just true leadership. And
Yeah.
they're starving for it. Okay. As I look at it through a different perspective. So let me fast forward. July 7th, 2017, I'm in the top bunk. And I wake up and I have this chest pain. It's not anxiety. It's not medical, but it is so tight. It is so tight and I can't breathe. And Uwe's sleeping and I just go, okay, I gotta breathe. I take this deep breath like this and I just go, oh, like that. And then I just go like that. And when I took this deep breath, my whole body was filled with just ice. It was just like ice. I didn't know what was going on. And then I take this deep breath out. And I've never been a movie watcher. I was always on the go. Let's go see a movie. I ain't got time. You know what I mean? But I did see The Green Mile. And I remember that one scene where he's blowing these flies out of his mouth. Maybe that's why God wanted me to see that movie.
Maybe.
Yeah. So he's blowing this. And as I'm exhaling, I had this anger, resentment, rage, fear, paranoia. And it's all coming in my body. And I take this deep breath that comes in. All right. And I feel love. I'm like, dude, what is happening to me? And so I'm looking and the diabetics are being released. Diabetics go get their shots. And I'm like, I love that dude. I love that dude. And no one's seeing it. I'm like, I love that. I love this dude. I love that card. I love Louis. And I didn't know what was happening. It's like Ricky Bobby. The car drove real fast. I don't know what to do with my hands. You know what I mean? I don't know what to do with my hands. And so I'm processing this. And that's when I knew Christ came into my life. Because I was asking these questions and saying these little prayers. I was reading the Bible and I was like, okay, come on, man, flex your muscle. And there were times with overdoses and stuff like that. I go, okay, man, Jesus, if you're real, come to my life. And I was expecting it right then, but he came into my life right there. And I changed forever. And, and I totally forgave everyone.
In that moment, or was that a process?
It was a process, but I did. It was all gone, the resentment and anger.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to know more, how to pray. I don't want to pray. God is good. God is great. Thank you for our cake. Whatever the standard prayer is, And so I went to the back of the Bible, all right? And I looked up prayer. It took me to Matthew 6, the Lord's Prayer. Now in this Bible, actually I brought it. I'll show you after the show. But as I read, I underlined every word. I read word for word, word for word, word for word. And I've heard people say, I read the Bible from the start. I said, I will never do that. You know what I mean? But here I am. Back up. So this guy that let me use his Bible, the gangbanger, he says, always put that Bible back under my bed at night. Okay. I started getting nervous and I wouldn't mark it and I just read it. And I would journal, write stuff down. I didn't have any money or stuff. So a couple of guys let me have a pencil and a pen and I'm taking stuff down. So they loved my handwriting. So they would ask me to write letters, to their mom and dad, not dads, their baby mamas and all that stuff. I said, I'll do it on one condition. I ain't writing no hood. It's not about resentment. And so I'd write it for them. And they would give me a soup, because they knew I didn't have anything. Okay. So a soup is $1. So I was able to save up 13 soups. And I went to this Black Panther. Now here I am. I was doing $10, $15 million real estate deals. Okay. And I went to him and I made the biggest deal of my life. And I had 15 soups. And I bought that Bible from him for 11 soups.
Wow.
11 soups. And I always carry it with me. I got it with me.
Wow.
And it's
I love that. That's awesome.
for 11 soups, and he sold it to me, and I read Matthew 6, how to pray. But when people say, what's your favorite verse in the Bible? The favorite, I know Luke was talking about Matthew 6:33, love him. There's not a verse I don't like, but the one that changed my life was Matthew 6:14, 15. And I always do it in my translation. It's 14 says, if you forgive the ones who have sinned against you, my translation, if you forgive the ones who have hurt you, all right? The next verse says, then I will forgive your sins. I will set you free.
That's conditional.
And so when I read that, it hit me. I'm like, so how do I do it? The sooner that I accepted my role that I played in the situation, I can forgive. Wait a minute, Michael. You played a role in your grandfather sexually abusing you? Criminal act? Which is wrong. Not supporting it. I sure did. The role I played in was I chose to hold on to the resentment. And when I set that free, my life has never been the same since. And let me tell you, I met Judge Bennett. She looked at me and she says, I got to send you to prison. And when you get out, come back and see me. I said, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. I wasn't asking her to set me free. I told her, I said, I don't know why I'm doing the things I'm doing. I'm willing to do anything you tell me.
This was on July 7th.
No, this was before July 7th.
Okay.
So then I catch chain. I'm ahead of myself. I catch chain. I go down to Central Texas. I'm down there. They put me in another tank. Rock and roll. Same thing.
Wow.
And I walk in there. And
At this time, you're a Christian.
I'm a believer. Yes,
believe, yeah.
absolutely. 100%. You know, I'm walking there and I mean, it's nuts, this thing. And so they put me in another ag tank. I don't care. You know what I mean? So they put me in there and come out the day room. I'm sitting by myself. And this guy, you know, blood gang member, you know, walks up past me and he looks down and he goes, man, that's cool handwriting. He says, what's it say? I go, read it. And he says, I can't read. And I looked up at God and I said, I see you. I see you.
Man,
so now
I've been here before.
Now I'm in another tank. Now there's guys in there that could read, but I'm in another tank. A lot of them couldn't read, but my writing and the style, and I did the same thing in that tank. The exact same thing. And it came together. It was all, I didn't have a curriculum. Heck, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm a reckless Christian. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, Romans, just open it up and read, you know. No, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm getting there. And so, because I'm understanding and feeling the spiritual realm. When it comes down to religion, I'm an agnostic. I don't want any part of it. But when it's the gospel of Jesus Christ in that word, in that book, every word, I got you.
Yeah.
I'm in, all in. And so, as this is going on, that's when I read Matthew 6, 14, 15, because I was trying to understand forgiveness. Why am I not angry anymore? Why am I not resentful anymore? And all this stuff. And when I read 14, 15, Matthew 6, 14, and 15, I go, wow. I felt so free, right? That was on October 11th, 2017. And I truly had forgiven everyone. Truly. All the power was gone after I read those two verses. Friday, October 13th, they came over the speaker and they said, Michael Molthan, bunk and junk. That's when they came over the speaker, and everybody's going nuts. Even the guards were like going, I'm on my way to Henderson, Texas, to Bradshaw unit. And that doesn't happen. They knew it. They checked the computer again. And the computer says, state of Texas set you free. We have to get you out of here. We have to release you. I said, I was in my head going, no, because this is a mistake. I don't want to come back through booking. And
I'd just rather stay here and
just let me
do what I need
y'all
to
go
do.
figure it out. I got more time to serve. I mean, here's my pink carbon. And they know all this. They're freaking out. Everybody's freaking. The inmates in there, when they said it, they start crying. They don't want me to leave. I'm talking bangers, you know, crying, don't want me to leave. They literally kicked me out of prison. And I look up, I'm bald, you know, shaved down. I look up in the sky and I said, what do you want me to do? And I could hear it. I could hear his voice. I used to hear people say this. God spoke to me. I said, dude, you are a crackhead. Mm-hmm. But he spoke to me through my thoughts and feelings. And he says, walk. So I started the journey. I walked 300 miles back to Dallas. from Central Texas to turn myself in because there was a mistake.
Mm.
And I'm going to go turn myself in. I'm going to do this the right way. And I'll never forget also verbally that, God told me, he says, now walk, don't put my name in your mouth. Just go show the world who I am. And so I look back at this and it says the result of forgiveness, God sets our bond. He gives Christ the key. Jesus puts it in the lock, turns it, and physically, literally opened the jail and set me free. And I walk into that courthouse.
Judge Bennett.
Judge Bennett. Now remember, I'm locked up. There's guys in there making their plans. I'm not making a plan for anything. I'm just reading and studying. I don't have a clue. Don't care what's going to happen in my life. And I get back. I'm sunburned. I'm freaking sore. I get back the following Friday. It takes me a week to get there, and I get in there. She had heard what I'd been doing. Other inmates had been coming to her saying, hey, this guy in there has changed my life. He's reading to me. And she heard that. She goes, what? And remember, she says, when I got out, come back and see her. That was going to be 2 or 3 years later. Here I am. I get May 29th, 2017. October 13th, I get released, whatever the 7 days are. I walk in there. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go back to prison.
5 months. It was 5 months from the time you went in until they said,
yep,
Bunk and John.
That's right. So I walk in, and she looked at me, and she goes, Mr. Molthan, because all my charges were just crazy. Every time I got jammed up, I mean, she's like, have you lost your mind?
Yes.
Like
the kid
and she just walked
just
in.
keeps doing
Because
the
she'd
same
always
thing.
say, she goes, you're going to be on probation. No chaos. Can you do that, Michael? Yes. And I walk in, she's like this. And she goes, there's something happening in your life. The bailiffs, who I know very well, and those guys, they could see it. They could feel it. And I remember, we show the world who God is. We show the world who Christ is. Christ, I don't use him as a marketing tool, right? I say Jesus, all the time. It's like me saying Shane. It's a name. It's easy to say God today, but a lot of people, it's uncomfortable to say Jesus. Why? Because he's real, right? He's real.
Yes.
So I walk in there, and she goes, I'm not going to get in the way. And she goes, I'm gonna set you free. And she dropped all my charges.
Wow.
And she says, here's what I want you to do, is I want you to go pay it forward. And 8 years later, this is what I'm doing. And when I left that courthouse, I didn't know where I was going. So I went to the Salvation Army. I'm sleeping on a concrete floor. My mom and dad had gotten divorced. And I went just to go check on my dad, and we don't have a good relationship. He's passed since, but we didn't have good. But I went there just to check on it, because I'm this new person. So I'm go to check on him, and his name is the same as mine. And he says, hey, some guy keeps calling my cell phone trying to get a hold of you. And I'm like, I don't owe anybody money. I'm like, what? And so it's a guy named Brian Glenn. And in Dallas, he had this well-known talk show on the radio, business talk show. And he wanted to talk to me about real estate trends and where has Michael Molthan been, So I used my dad's cell phone. I'm in Salvation Army clothes, flip-flops. I don't have anything. Just the Friday, October 13th, I was set free. I'm on his talk show Tuesday.
By your previous standards, you had nothing, but you actually had everything.
Come on. Come on. That's looking at it through God's perspective.
Yeah.
That's right. And I saw it that way.
That's awesome.
Okay. And so I call him on my dad's phone. He said, hey, man, thanks for calling. You mind jumping on the air? And we want to do an interview about real estate. I said, sure. I had no plan. I didn't know what I was going to do. I mean, I'm shocked that, but I'm not shocked. So he asked me, first of all, before we get off, we see your brother just killing it, man, and all this stuff. And part of my story is my brother took over my company. That's why it's so similar to Joseph. I was sold, dumped in the pit. They took all my money. I was sold to slavery. Same story. Okay. Same story. And I said, well, yeah, I've had some detours in my life, the book Detours, right? And so he goes, well, what's going on? So I tell him this entire story on this talk show.
On this real estate talk
show. Standing in the driveway, all right? Talking to him.
Yeah, I love it.
And he just goes, "Oh my gosh, he's a strong." But today he works for right wing media.
Yeah.
He's with Trump, and so anyways, he goes, he's like, "Molthan, this is unbelievable." He's like, "This makes perfect sense. What year was this?" I said, "Brian, this was Friday.
We're
This
still
was
here.
This was 3 days ago." And so when that hit, the local media got a hold of it. Channel 8 News got a hold of it. They did a story. iHeartRadio got a hold of it. They invited me to come down to their studio to be on a talk show at iHeartRadio to share this. I don't think it's unique, but they introduced me on this show. It's like, we have the real live Forrest Gump here, of all this story. And so I'm on this, talk show on iHeartRadio. A week later, they signed me to do a talk show on iHeartRadio, Drive Home Traffic, talking about recovery. And I was doing Drive Home Traffic. The second show we had, and we're doing Facebook Live and stuff like this. And the second show that we have, I get this message in Messenger from Give 'em Jesus. I'm like,
Luke Hawkins.
Luke Hawkins. So I pulled this message up, and he says, "Dude, I watch a lot of stuff." He says, "But you are spitting. You're transparent. You're vulnerable. It's attractive. I can relate." He says, "I want to warn you about spiritual warfare." And I'm like, "What is that?" I didn't know what spiritual warfare was.
Well, I'm gonna interrupt you real quick, because that's exactly kind of what I was about to ask. Is, you lived a life, like you said, 10, $15 million deals. I mean, that was very much a part of what kept you away from Christ in the early years, is this glorification of self, and then you had this awakening. Christ came into your life. He saved your life. But even in that moment when we know we're filled with His Spirit, we're still broken. And you almost immediately, like 3 days later, began getting a lot of attention again. It was quick,
Right.
and you're on radio shows, and you're rolling into this new Christ-centered life. Did the old self creep in at all?
No.
That's awesome. That is so cool.
Now, when Luke started talking about spiritual warfare, and I started, here's the great thing for the viewers and listeners, is that as a believer in the Holy Spirit running your life, I recognize those things now.
Right. When
As
that pride creeping in.
As a non-believer, and I'm trying to go by what the world and the culture is trying to define as success, that would have gassed me up.
Yeah.
Right? That would have gassed me. We see it all the time. All right. And so it didn't, and I was, prepared for it. Plus, me being so guarded and not trusting. I have this gift. I can read people real quick. I was given that as a young kid. I mean, because of what happened to me, I wouldn't let anybody close. It's not lack of trust. I could just read them real quick. To this day. That's why I'm on the show. Like Luke, when he said, and when I looked at y'all and I watched, the deal, the first 2 minutes, I'm like, solid. Like, even my fiance is like, when I say that someone's solid, it gets her full blown attention. I don't talk bad about people. I'm just like,
Right.
no,
My wife is a lot like you.
Yeah, I mean, I
Very,
can read it right off the
very
rip.
discerning.
Discerning, that's the word.
It's definitely a gift from God,
Mhm.
and she also has a hard time letting people in.
Yeah, and so it's and it's a symptom. It's a symptom for me. It was a symptom of trauma, right? But now it's a gift.
And so Luke is warning you about this spiritual warfare.
So I call him
Get
because I'm a
ready for it,
sponge. Give him Jesus. Heck, I'll give him. I'm like, so I just called him and we talked on the phone. And once I started talking, I mean, after the first minute, I was like, "This is my people."
This is my dude.
This is my dude. And I have two mentors. I mean, I have like 3 men that are in my circle, and that's my mentor, Ray Wiley Hubbard, who is a singer songwriter and
Country guy, right?
Yeah, just awesome dude, and he's my mentor. Luke, Luke is one of them, and then Dr. Jeff Warren, is another one. Wayne McCullough, and these guys at Park Cities Baptist, and you know, but Luke and Ray are the ones that I can call and say, hey, don't tell anybody, but I ate my boogers in the third grade. You know what I mean? One of those deals.
Right.
It ain't gonna go anywhere. But
These are your what's the verse? Proverbs 27:17. Iron sharpens iron.
Yeah.
These are your people.
Luke is the only guy that I've come across that he I mean, him and his wife came to that dinner with us in Highland Park. If you don't know what Highland Park is, it's like the most wealthiest town in the country.
Yes.
Right? It's real money. And so we're in Highland Park Village and we eat Mexican food, and then we go over and eat ice cream, and our waiter with the ice cream lives an alternative lifestyle, you can tell. Okay? And Luke just starts gassing them up, man. He's putting on. I've seen guys do that like in public. I'm like, oh man, this is uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
He is the best. He had me accepting Christ again. I mean, I'm like,
Yeah.
but it was so good. It's this gift. I can't do that. I mean, I'm not this guy. Like, I brought 16 people to Christ yesterday. I don't do the numbers. Like, people reach out and say, all that, but he is.
It's a gift. Luke walks in here first time we ever met him and sits down, and I had some conversation with him. Sean, I don't think Sean wasn't in here yet. Rich, the guy behind the camera, he's like, one of the first things he says is like, hey, Rich, I'm Luke. Nice to meet you. He said, do you know Jesus? I was like, you have a personal relationship with Jesus? And Rich is like, yeah, I do. And he's like, okay, cool. And then it's like, awesome. And then they got to know each other.
It's he's amazing. He's my dude, man. I'm talking to him. But so anyway, so we where did I leave off?
Spiritual warfare.
Spiritual warfare.
You called him.
So he's educated me on this. He goes, I want to warn you, be prepared for spiritual warfare because you speak truth. You speak truth and it's coming because the enemy wants to take you out. I heard him, so I immediately go home and start doing word study and spiritual warfare and understand, getting educated because I want to know, and he's right because what Luke and I do, it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. It is the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. And, even to this day. But I just remember God saying, just go show the world who I am. Guys, there's been many times where I've literally broken down the home studio. I said, I'm done. Done. All right. And I went out.
What thoughts are going through your mind when you get to a point where you say,
Selfish.
I'm going to break down this
Selfish. I can't pay my bills.
Okay.
Can't pay my bills, and there's no money coming in. I'm not going to ask for any because I'm doing the Lord's work. I don't know how to do this thing. You know what I mean? I'm educated on the prosperity gospel and all that stuff. I don't want to do that. I mean, that's a whole. Can they plant seeds? Absolutely. I don't want any part of it. The prosperity gospel is that God needs us. God didn't need us. We need Him.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so,
you accept Jesus and everything's going to be golden. That is not true.
No.
Because every story in the Bible talks about hardship.
They've all been tarred and feathered.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how He does use people like tarred and feathered. Luke, I mean, Luke's story. And so we all have our story. And so here's what's interesting is that, so then M2 The Rock, started. So, Michael Molthan, M2. And then The Rock, and the reason why I came up with, or God gave me the name The Rock, is that we hear about hitting rock bottom. And every time I kept getting arrested and hitting rock bottom, every time, I was always digging to get out of the bottom. I was always, so my character defects, everything that I did that got me to rock bottom, I would use those same tools to get out of the bottom. I wasn't drinking and using, but I'm going to make the comeback. Anger, resentment, I'll show you. Let's do this.
And a heavy drive to use whatever it takes.
Let's get down.
To get away.
Self-will run riot. Positive thinking and all this stuff. And then I finally realized the last time that all these times that the rock at the bottom was Christ. And so the last time I stayed at the bottom. And I allowed prisoners that killed people, meant to kill them, to bring me out of the bottom by asking me to read to them. And it's amazing. So it's a
man, you've been through a lot. It's a question that relates to your past. So in John 11, we see that Lazarus has died.
Mm-hmm.
This is Martha and Mary's brother. Martha and Mary, the story of Martha and Mary, where one of them's making dinner and one of them's washing Jesus' feet. And Jesus had a relationship with Martha and Mary, loved them, loved Lazarus. It says that he was fond of, I don't know the exact wording. Jesus hears that Lazarus has died or is sick or has died. And Jesus gets to him 4 days after he dies.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that it says in verse 35 is that Jesus wept. He knew that Lazarus was going to be healed, but he felt the weight because he loved him. When it comes to you, you lost a career, freedom, a wife, reputations, relationships before finding Christ. So even as a redeemed man, do you think God still allows you to feel the weight of those losses?
Let me answer it this way. As a result of accepting Christ and understanding what it's all about, I realize today through looking at it through, it's all about perspective. And there's only one perspective that gives me peace, and it's seeing it through God's perspective. And where I really become closer to God is in pain.
Oh,
Is when that's the different creature I am today. I wish he would get off the gas a little bit. Luke and I talk about this. I mean, literally, I talked to Luke about the 20th of every month. Luke, man, I can't talk to Lee right now. I'm scared to death. I don't know how I'm gonna pay rent. He says, well, how much you need? And then he tells me some story about it's true. When he tells me, he's like, I'll never forget, I needed $8,000.18 and, I prayed for it and, and whatever. His stories are great. They're real.
Yeah.
And I'm like, God always shows up on the 28th of the month. It's just amazing how it does it. It's the perspective that when I'm in pain, when people say like prayers and ritual prayers, here is my ritual prayer that I made up, okay, is that in the morning, if I don't know what to pray, I just go to this one. God, you are all powerful. Who am I fooling? You know what's going to happen, exactly what's going to happen today, May 21st. You know what's going to happen. Help me, whether it be painful or good, to see it through your perspective and not mine, so I can share the experience with others. I'm in complete acceptance. And I know that's when I do it. Now, a lot of times when it's painful and bad things are happening, I'm on a detour. I'm human. I'm trying to figure it out and all that stuff. But I always sit back and look at it. And I go, God, I know you're allowing this to happen. Hey, the way we get stronger is put more weight on.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So he allows that. Well, why would a good God do that? He allows that to happen so I will turn to him so he can perform the supernatural. That's why. Why does God allow pain and suffering? So I will turn to him. If he didn't allow pain and suffering, I'd be high right now.
Right.
Since that moment in October of 2017, what's been your biggest heart's desire?
See my boys.
Have you not seen them since then? Have you been able to talk to them at all?
There was a short moment. They behind the in-laws back and the ex's back, they reached out to me and that got shut down real quick.
How old are they now?
They are, 24, 23. They're tight, good kids,
What would you do to be able to talk to them?
It's not what I would do. I'm telling you what I am doing.
Mm-hmm.
Is helping others. Mm-hmm. I just continue to serve with no expectations. Mm. That's the key.
Yeah.
No expectations. Because when we have expectations, 100% of the time, it turns into a resentment. And the number one thing that's killing the entire human race is take all the labels away, is resentments. That's what Satan wants to do. All he wants to do is just control our thoughts.
Mm.
especially men.
Mm.
And my message to men about this is that, you know, to all the men out there, as a father and a husband, never underestimate that role, because our children's view of Christ depends on their view of us.
Mm.
That's it. That's what their view of Christ is, their view of us, how we're handling situations. And when we mess up, have that transparent conversation with the kid. Go, I messed up. When a parent sees their kid behaviors, if your children's behaviors is agitating you or agitating me, the reason why it's bothering me is because I did it or I'm doing it.
That's right. Our children are a reflection of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I saw a pastor just the other day that he was preaching, and he was saying, if you only come to church with your kids 1 hour a week on Sunday morning, he said, he's like, everybody thinks they need to go in and take their kids to Sunday school and come to church and listen to the pastor preach and and worship. And he's like, the best place that your kids can be in that 1 hour is sitting right next to you in the service, watching you praise the Lord, watching you sing, watching you write notes, seeing the way you worship. Sunday school's great. Somebody's going to bleed some Jesus into them during that Sunday school time, but nothing is more powerful for your children than sitting next to you in church on Sunday morning, watching you do it.
Yeah.
Let
me give you,
that's impactful.
That is very impactful. And I always say this, it's time for men to take back the dinner table. It's time to take,
oh, dude, yeah, I love that.
To take that leadership. When I was incarcerated, this is interesting. I never saw a Jewish person incarcerated. 100% of the inmates that I was locked up with, I never had a visitor, but when they had visitation, it was a big moment, right? It was their baby mama, their aunt, or their grandmother, or their mom. Never dad.
It's because dads were never present in their lives anyway, right?
The hardest book to find in the public schools is the Bible. When you're incarcerated, it's the easiest book. They're all over the tank. I think we got this backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, that's why it's so important for men to become kingdom men. And what is a kingdom man? It's how God defines the man, not the world or the culture.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for the ladies that are listening, an irresponsible man is not ready for a marriage. I speak to myself.
Yeah.
I'm not. I mean, so all these things, and so how do you know if you're being a good dad? How do I know if I'm doing this right? How do I know if I'm doing this right? And I don't want to be graphic. I want to get the point across. Okay. And so for the listeners, here's when you know you're being a good father: is your daughter comes home from school, says, "Dad, I need to talk to you." Sure, babe. What's up? And you sit down, and she goes, "Dad, I heard the girls today talking, and one of the girls was talking and bragging about oral sex with her boyfriend, and they just thought it was so cool." Really? How'd that make you feel? She goes, "Dad, it scared me. It scared me." That's when you know you're a good dad, because she feels safe. I didn't have that. I didn't feel safe to be that vulnerable. That's when you know you're a good dad. You know you're a good dad when your kid tries to drink one night and can't drive, and he calls his dad to come in. Don't you dare scold that kid. That's a victory, and that's a compliment to you, Dad. It's a compliment that you're doing a good job. I was in Bible study yesterday, and the guy was saying, "Man, my son sat down with me. He says he wants to get a tattoo. He's 18. He wants to get a tattoo, and he wanted to talk to me about it." I said, and he was like all freaked. I said, "Wait, get off the gas, bro.
Yeah,
That's
just
a compliment.
Talk.
That's a compliment.
Yeah,
he feels safe with you."
That's beautiful. One thing that, like, my daughter is 16, our relationship is starting to transfer to a new level, and we're starting to see those moments. And man, I'm just thankful.
Yeah,
I'm so thankful.
Praise God.
And my boys aren't really there yet. We're still in cop to coach mode.
Yeah.
our youth pastor says that there's 4 modes that you're in as a parent, and the first one is caregiver. You're just trying to keep your kids alive.
Right.
Next one's cop, because you're constantly correcting them in a healthy manner, hopefully. The next one's coach, and this is like ages 13 to 18, where they go to school, they go to practice, they do these things and activities, and they come home to you. They have to come home to you, and you get to coach them. You have the opportunity to be their coach and their helper.
Right.
And then the last one's consultant. And a consultant is based on how good were you at the first 3. Because when you need a consultant, if you need a consultant, Michael, you're going out and getting a consultant, right? And you're making that decision on who you want to be your consultant.
Mm-hmm.
These kids are going to make a decision on who they want to be their consultants when they get out of our homes. We want it to be them.
Right.
I mean, we want it to be us. But have we done what we need to do now in order to make that happen? Back to your story, what's something that God is still healing in you even after years of freedom?
Oh, that's good. I put it healing under the category of, we hear the word. When I was incarcerated, I really got into word studies. All right. When we hear the word forgiveness. Okay. Do I really know what it means? No, I didn't. Okay. But I knew what LIBOR was. I knew what interest rates were. I knew what, EBITDA was. I knew what cash flow. I mean, I'm in, I knew all this stuff. But it's like Dr. Tony Evans says, men can name the stats of NFL football games, but can't recite one scripture. He checked me. I'm convicted. The word convicted, the word study on convicted, is like, what does that really mean? And so those things what was your question? I'm sorry.
That's totally okay. What's something God is still healing in you, even after years of freedom?
So I'm learning a lot about the word triggers. We hear the word trigger a lot. And so in the addiction world, chemical to substance abuse disorder, are you triggered when you drive by that street corner, that's where I did that. Yeah, there's trauma triggers, okay? And then there's the little triggers that hit, like, perfect example, Lee, I'll never forget that. So she said to me, and it was, I'm in a relationship where we have healthy conflict. That's so cool. You know what I mean? It's not like, it's not a tennis match, it's like, but it's a very healthy, there's times where it's cranked up and a lot of times where it's tired, you know what I mean? So, and I just say time out, putting pin in this. But she said one time, are you lying to me? And I felt something inside, just real quick, anger, right? I was like, and I'm ready to, and I can spitbox anybody. You know what I mean? If it's on, it's on. My worst character defect my whole life was this mouth. Now today it's my asset because it comes from the Spirit, not from here. Right. And so
it's funny how the Lord shifts these
so
things.
I sat there and I go, why when you said that I just got real angry? Because you're not accusing me. You said, are you lying to me? My whole life, my parents would say, you're a liar. 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 And a lot of times sometimes I would lie to them because I didn't want to get beat. So I was hedging my bet. I was trying to figure out. But just that one little thing. So now I notice things that she's doing something that bothers me. And the reason why it's bothering me is because maybe my mom did it. It triggers an old feeling. She's not doing anything to me. She's just doing it. It's not on her. Mm-hmm. But the old me, I'd put her on blast. That's not her. So those are the things I'm noticing. I'm seeing it through a different perspective.
You have a curiosity around triggers instead of just being triggered.
I have a curiosity around everything. These opportunities, say, God, let me see it through your perspective so I can come on this podcast and share it with someone, that one person that watching this just starts doing this. See, y'all are doing that. Yeah. You don't even realize you're doing it.
Yeah.
But when I see people doing this in the audience, that means the Spirit's talking. That means there's a connection.
They're listening.
They're listening. That's why I said at the start of the show, I can't wait to hear what I'm about to say. I have no idea what I'm gonna say.
We couldn't either.
Yeah, but that's just the little things, the little details that I'm working on. Not being hard on myself, but just the details. Blocking and tackling, golf,
You
grip and
also
stance.
you understand through scripture and your study of it that it until we're in heaven, we're going to continue to be refined and sanctified, and whatever is not right is the Spirit's going to attempt to make it right.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's something that we'll be working on forever. And it's something that we'll fail at and get better at, and if we're listening to the Spirit, by the time we kick the bucket, hopefully we'll be at our heightened state of the best we've ever been, maybe there, whatever that struggle is. But yeah, it's something that, I just think about people, they think, oh, I've accepted Christ. They don't realize the journey that they're about to go on. It's like, well, life's not about to get better, just so you know.
Yeah.
Well,
It can be
it can,
peaceful, peace and joy, but
well, right there, when y'all said that, if we're trying to pitch this to a non-believer,
That's right.
If we're trying to pitch this to them, and it's like life's it's okay. M2, since you accepted Christ, I mean, did you win the winning lottery number? Stuff like that. Like, and it's a perspective. It's like I tell them, I'm like going, bro, when you sign up for this, it's the spiritual realm is awesome.
Yes.
I mean, it is awesome. And when I was talking to Luke driving over here, on the beam, it's awesome. How do we get on the beam? How do we feel that spiritual level? And, we talk about depression, this big thing, and put on medication. I'm not a doctor, but, some people do need medication. There's medical deals, and that's a blessing. But how do we get spiritual? How do we get into the now? And this is what I learned in prison with UE, because I realized that the reason why everything was slowing down and those 4 days went by is that for the first time in my life, I was out of self helping someone else, expecting nothing in return.
Yeah.
I was doing it, expecting not to be set free, that maybe someone will see me reading this guy. It was doing it. And it put me in the safest place in the world is right here, right now, because that's where God is at. How do we get there? It's real simple.
I think
Serve.
Serve. And so that's kind of how, if we were just kind of wrapping it up, Shane, like I think about if somebody maybe just caught a glimpse or two of this podcast, and you said it just a second ago, you were like, if we were just kind of pitching this to someone, they might think, I don't know if I want to jump on that train. That seems like there's pain. That seems like, because we've talked a lot about pain. We've talked a lot about the struggle that we've experienced even after, the Lord's taken control of our lives, knowing that, that pain is when we realize that we need the Lord. It's when we lean into Him even more, and so, if what would be your final, words to the listeners who might have caught a part of the episode that was like, yeah, there's a lot of pain involved in this faith walk, in this faith journey.
So,
what would be your just kind of looking in the camera?
you're speaking directly to them here. This is your moment.
can I just dovetail on something? Then I'll do
Absolutely.
that, because
Absolutely.
as long as I were talking on a show. So, but the back to when someone says, if it's so painful to accept Christ, why do I want to do that? Okay, I said, well, here's the deal. Based on my personal experience, here's the great news, is that when I am spiritually fit and walking with Christ, man, I'm just carving through life. It is great. And yes, God wants us to have nice things. He wants us to have money. He wants us to have all this stuff. But He doesn't want it to be our source. That's the main thing. He doesn't want it to be our God. My personal experience, every time I start experiencing pain, and I start experiencing this, I do a spiritual autopsy. And 100% of the time when I look at it, is because I've gotten out of the Word of God, I've gotten busy, I'm doing stuff, and I start playing God. And guess what? God will allow me to have all the control I want, for everything to get completely out of control, for me to hit my knees and turn to Him again and realize I never had control in the first place.
Yeah.
Right. So as long as I am walking in the spirit and hanging out with you two and picking up and calling Luke, and because a lot of times I get in my head and there's spiritual warfare, I don't call anybody. Sometimes I just like staying stuck. You know what I mean? It's comfortable, but I snap out of it because I know where this is going to go. And I call another man, a believer, and say, man, I need a good listening to. And so the quicker we can close that gap, life's great.
Yeah.
But when I start straying and I start feeling pain, I start feeling suffering, guess what I start putting in this gap right here? Visible things to try to fix the invisible problem. So I want to close this gap as soon as possible.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy.
Mm-hmm.
So, I had one more, and I even hesitate to ask. So we'll get to it in a
You
second.
look really good on that screen, by the way. You actually look like Kyle Larson.
I don't know who
The
that
race car.
is.
We'll look him up. Kyle
Oh,
Larson.
Kyle Larson. Yes.
Yeah, you look like
I'll take
him.
that.
Yeah.
I'll take that. So, in this camera right here, speak to the guy that you were. There's somebody out there that's nodding their head, and that just needs a little encouragement to go here, look here, do this. Speak to you 15 years ago, and just encourage them. Or be hard on them, whatever you want to do. This is your time.
It's love and tolerance is our code. We don't shoot our wounded. And if you're watching this, I challenge you that this is the moment. And I've heard this before. I've always heard these. This is your moment that you can change your life forever. They are right. And a lot of this spiritual awakening, it comes quickly or it comes slowly. But I challenge you to invite Jesus into your life of your understanding. See, Jesus, there's a lot of people's Jesus I don't want, but the Jesus Christ, the Son of God that we read in the Bible, is my Lord and Savior. I can't even believe I'm talking like this today. But take that risk and you ask him into your life, however you want to do it, and just simply say, hey, Jesus, I just watched this show and I want what he's got. I want what these men have. I don't know how to do this. I don't know you. This is so new to me. I mean, to reach out to this person that it's so questioned in the community or culture, but I want you to come in my life, and I want you to come in my life because the pain is bad enough. I'm confused. I'm lost. And I want to be a good father. Deep down inside, I want to be a good dad. I want to be a good father. I want to be forgiven. I'm tired of feeling shame, regret, remorse. I'm tired of laying in bed with morbid reflection and beating myself up. But as a man, I can't tell anybody. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. And so ask Jesus into your life, and he will make it bright and clear. And when it happens, right when you say that prayer, you say amen, open your ears, and you'll see it. You'll hear it. You'll get a phone call. You go, wait a minute. This is weird. No, it's Jesus.
That's good. This is the last thing that I'm going to ask you, and I hesitate to ask you, and I'm going to give you full control.
I can't wait.
I'm going to give you full control of whether you want to answer this question for whatever reasons, and then whether, if you do answer it, you want it to actually be aired. And I'm asking this because I think this is something that I would want if I was a guest on this show. Can you look back at that camera and speak to your boys and just whatever you want to say to them? If you don't want to, that's okay. Maybe something they see, maybe something they don't. I like what you said earlier of doing things without expectation. You didn't ask to do this. We're asking you to do this if you want to. So it's prompted. Feel free.
All right. Thank you for that opportunity. First of all, I am so proud of everything you're doing. And I don't care if I go the rest of my life, never see or talk to you again, but I'm proud of you. And I love you. You know I love you, and I am always here for you. You knock on that door, come on in, no questions asked, and you know that. You're safe with me. And I wouldn't be honest to say I miss y'all tremendously. Tremendously. And I just want to be a good dad. You know, I just want to be remembered as a good dad. That's it.
I feel your honesty there, man. Like you've talked about that a lot, being a good dad and what it takes to be a good husband and a good father. It's important to you.
Very.
I'm thankful for your honesty. Thankful for your relationship with Jesus Christ. Thankful for your openness and willingness and your vulnerability. That's the word that was coming out of my mouth, man. We've been doing this for a minute. Transparency.
You know, that is and men that are single and, you know, man, I want to date and all this stuff. The most attractive thing to a woman is vulnerability. Is just vulnerability, being vulnerable, because that's what they're engineered for. They receive. You know, the receiver.
I appreciate you talking to your boys. If you've been through heartache with family, you know that there's hurt between there. We know that there's hurt between your relationship with your boys and maybe some other relationship too. We all have those relationships in our life where there's hurt and there's other things that are in the middle that are hard to get past. Our encouragement to you today is to put the love of Jesus there, set it aside, and figure out what it takes. You can make that phone call today. You can show up at that person's house today. You can start by praying for that person or those people, and God can heal those relationships. We truly believe that, or we would not be doing this.
100%.
That's it. Go kick the day in the face, and we'll catch you on the next one.